Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, May 23rd, 2025, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research 2 channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, I think you got a cool video for you today, and it's about King Solomon or King Sulayman in Islam and the temple and how King Suleiman commanded and directed some of the jinn to help build the temple. So, all right. So how this came about is over this past weekend I was talking with my coworker Waleed, who is a good friend of mine and also a guy I live with, and he's a practicing Muslim. So anyway, I don't know. We're always talking about all kinds of stuff. And somehow the conversation led to the jinn and who they were and all kinds of stuff. So anyway, he tells me this story about King Suleiman and how he commanded and directed the jinn to help with the building of the temple in Jerusalem for the Hebrews, for the Jews. Okay, so he tells me that King Solomon directed these jinn to build the temple. So I said to him, I said, "Are these jinn large size, creatures, entities?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "As a matter of fact, they're giants." Okay, so here we go. We got stone walls and we got giants together. Okay, so my God, I struck gold here with this because this is going to be an interesting story. So anyway, I started doing the research about it, and of course, I mean, if you've been following along with my videos on my previous channel, Stonewall Research channel, and this channel, Stonewall Research 2 channel, or if you've never been here before, after all the research into the accounts of the giants through newspaper articles, etc., the hundreds and hundreds of accounts that I went over on my channel, state by state here in the United States, internationally, etc. So, in any case, so I did all this research, and of course, I believe that the giant peoples of the past, at least some of them, were extremely intelligent and well versed in engineering and other advanced sort of mathematics, astronomy, etc. All this sort of stuff, um, and even may go even further into the past into much more advanced civilizations. But so they were often found buried in either sand or gravel, which are, sort of the basic foundation for building a building out of stone, especially dry laid stone or mortarless buildings, with just tightly fitting stone. So, in any case, so I wanted to research this, and of course, the first thing I took a look at is, what is this story about King Suleiman in Arabic. That's his name in Arabic. It's the same King Solomon from the Old Testament, and this story from Islam about how the jinn, built helped build this temple. And if you know anything about the Temple on the Mount, and the size of the stones that are in the walls at the Temple Mount and just how large they are. Like they see one showing like one's 45 feet, they weigh 400 tons, 500 tons, and they would put one on top of another. So, how do they do this in ancient times there without a crane? We have cranes today, you could barely lift that sort of thing. So, how are they doing it back in those times? And I've always contended that it was the sort of giant humanoids that were around that built these things. Again, they were buried in sand or gravel, often sand or gravel, built with cut stone, etc., etc. And the myths of the giants, them playing around with stone all the time, and their tests of strength. So, you know, this is a common theme with the myths of the giants. So let's see what the internet says about it here, the AI here. Giant myths often feature tests of strength, showcasing the incredible power and sometimes even the vulnerability of these mythical beings. These tests can range from challenging wrestling matches to lifting massive stones and often involve trickery or the revelation of hidden weaknesses. Okay, and it gives some examples here of these giant myths in the past. Thor, and Pace's wrestling match, the trial of giants, lifting stones in Scottish culture. In Scotland, lifting stones were used as tests of strength and manhood, with clan stones being lifted to waist height. Hercules labors, Hercules again. Giant feasts and challenges. In Irish mythology, giants might challenge warriors to test their strength by swinging an axe or competing in a feast. Well, what about swinging an axe? What's such a big deal about that? But after you hear about all these giant axes and celts being dug up around the world here that no average sized person could swing horizontally, let alone overhead at all. Just be impossible for them to use any of these weapons. Well, you know, there might be some truth to that. So anyway, so these tests of strength that I'm always talking about, and going back to the Neolithic dolmen. Okay, so they're always saying these things, technically stated that they're funerary constructions or whatever it is, but whenever they do archaeology at these things, very seldomly do they find a skeleton buried in these things at all. So, among the thousands of them or whatever, just like, 1% of them have burials. So they have nothing to do with burials, okay? These are tests of strength, okay? We got them, here's them, from all around the world here. Well, here's some, at least one of them that we know about here in New York, okay, that they say it's a glacial erratic. This 90-ton stone was put on top of these pointy stones. The glacier, left it gently standing there on top of it. Okay, and there's a lot more of these things everywhere. It's just like on top of Mount Ephraim, where Jimmy, the Paleo Mountain Man, rest in peace, okay, and I were up on Mount Ephraim there in Vermont. We found a dolmen up there, okay, a giant slab tabletop stone with a rock underneath it propping it up. It was obviously done by humans, okay. Those are the mysterious stone constructions of Vermont there. Okay, so we were there to see that, personally. I'm not just a guy sitting behind a computer here. I've gone out there and researched some of this stuff. Okay, so I contend that these things are tests of strength, either by individuals or groups or peoples or whatever it might be. Okay, each individual group or people, doing their own test of strength is, show their prowess, whatever it is. And, the Giants have been long involved. And, who's living in New York up there in the ancient times there before the Iroquois got here 1,000 years ago? Well, the Stone Giants were living up there. The Stone Giants, okay? So just we talked about that before. Keep that all in mind when we're talking about this stuff here, okay? So I contend that the Giants built everything that's built out of giant stones in the past, okay? And much of everything that's finally built, either with cut stones and these amazing projects, giant projects, and all kind of stuff with the pyramids, whatever it might be, all built by giant peoples using slings and other sorts of things. But so let's concentrate on this story here and how it relates to what I believe is going on here, because I think it's, stating in one way or another about these sort of things going on in the past. Okay, so let's read this here. So, in Islamic tradition, King Solomon, Sulayman in Arabic, is described as having control over the jinn, who were used to assist in building the temple in Jerusalem, also known as the Masjid al Aqsa. This account highlights Solomon's divine gifts and the power of the jinn in construction. Okay, the power of the jinn in construction. So, So the Quran narrates that God granted Solomon dominion over the jinn and the wind, empowering him to command them for various tasks, including construction. It's interesting that they say the jinn and the wind, okay? Just keep that in mind as well. Okay, I'm going to try to make all these connections for you here so you can sort of see it the way that I'm seeing it here with what's said by mainstream, okay? The jinn's role in construction. The jinn, according to the narrative, were utilized to build the temple, Masjid al Aqsa, under Solomon's direction, showcasing his leadership and the jinn's obedience. The temple, oh, they says the importance of the temple. I care about that. So this is interesting here, okay, because this relationship to here is something that they don't mention here that we're going to talk about in a second. Okay, miraculous construction. Some accounts describe a miraculous fountain of molten brass or copper flowing for Solomon, used by the jinn in the construction work, further emphasizing the divine element in the project. Okay, the temple was later rebuilt by Sulayman, who faced challenges, but God ensured its completion despite Sulayman's passing. Jinn and other creations. The Quran also mentions other creations under Solomon's command, such as certain types of animals and creatures. I find that very interesting, further illustrating his power and divine blessings bestowed upon him. Okay, so that's not the only thing that the jinn were building and designing and crafting there at Suleiman's temple there. So, what were some of the other things that they were doing there? Okay, so I typed this in to do the search with a jinn rewarded by King Suleiman. So this is what it says here. In the story of King Solomon in the Quran and Islamic tradition, jinn were not rewarded in the traditional sense of being given gifts or favors for their work. Instead, they were made to serve Solomon and were subjected to the wind, which could travel a month's distance in both the morning and evening. Solomon had the power over the jinn, using them for construction and other tasks. So I assume the power over the wind was because they were traveling. They could fly and they could travel with the wind great distances or whatever it is. So, Solomon used the wind to control them, I guess. That's what he's trying to say. I'm guessing at that. I assume that's what it's all about because the jinn supposedly can fly. Jinn as servants. The Quran describes jinn working for Solomon by the command of his Lord, not as a reward for their service. They were forced to carry out tasks for Solomon, such as building fortresses, bowls, and kettles. Which is interesting that they're building bowls and kettles too. Okay, so the rest of this is unimportant. But so anyway, this is the story about it. They left that out in the other story about these bowls and kettles that they're building there. So I went to see about Solomon's Temple in Wikipedia here. So let's just read about it a little bit at the front because this is what the mainstream assessment is of the whole thing, and I think you're interested in what they say. Solomon's Temple, also known as the First Temple, was a biblical temple in Jerusalem believed to have existed between the 10th and 6th centuries BCE. Its description is largely based on narratives in the Hebrew Bible in which it was commissioned by a biblical king, Solomon, before being destroyed during the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in 587 BCE. No excavations are allowed on the Temple Mount, and no positively identified remains of the destroyed temple have been found. Most modern scholars agree that the first temple existed on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem by the time of the Babylonian siege, and there is significant debate among scholars over the date of its construction and the identity of its builder. So, in other words, they don't know shit. All right, that's basically what you're going to get out of this thing. If you don't get that out of this, I can't help you. But in a roundabout way, they more or less said that they don't know shit about it. Okay, so let me scroll down to here to take a look at this thingy here that's talked about in the Bible that doesn't make any sense. Okay, the molten sea. So it's just interesting, this molten sea, and what's described there in the stories from the Quran there about this this bowl, and this miraculous fountain of molten brass or copper flowing from Solomon. Okay, so you got that story there, and here's this story from the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament, the molten or brazen sea. Okay, so is there some connection there? I think there probably is. According to the Hebrew Bible, the molten or brazen sea was a large basin in the temple for ablution of of the priest, which means a washing of the priest. They always had to be clean before they went in the temple and went out of the temple. And if they did this or that, they had to stay away and, whatever it is. So, you had to keep clean all the time and whatnot. And I guess this bowl was, created for that purpose, is what they're trying to say here. Okay, is described in Kings and Chronicles. According to the Bible, it stood in the southeastern corner of the inner court. It was 5 cubits high, 10 cubits in diameter from brim to brim, and 30 cubits in circumference. Is rather large. The brim was like a calyx of a lily and turned outward about a handbreadth, or about 4 inches. It was placed on the backs of 12 oxen standing with their faces outward. I guess here's some sort of illustration of it from 1890, trying to show it here. I guess if it was like that with the oxen underneath, it was even higher. Okay, so the Book of Kings states that it contains 2,000 baths, or 90 cubic meters, while Chronicles states it can hold up to 3,000 baths, 136 cubic meters, and states that its purpose was to afford opportunity for the purification by immersion of the bodies of the priests. The fact that it was a wash basin that was too large to enter from above lends to the idea that water would likely have flowed from it down into a subcontainer beneath. So, in other words, there's this huge giant basin created there for the ablution and washing and cleansing of people and whatnot, but it's too big for the average person to use. You need a ladder to get up there, and once you're in it, you need a ladder to get out of it. It's probably over your head, with all the little short people that lived back then, supposedly. Okay, so it doesn't seem like it would be used by the average person. So why would you have that created? Okay, if they were creating these basins and bowls and stuff like that, the Jinn were. It seemed more like they were creating it for themselves, not for average people to use. If Solomon was commanding these guys to do anything, I would be like, whoa, 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 wait a second there. That's a little bit too big there, Mr. Jinn Man. Can you cut that thing down a little bit? I can't get into it. How am I going to get into that thing? So, it doesn't seem like this is made for average sized people at all, but seems like it was made for, people who are a little bit bigger, slightly more robust. The dopey euphemism that they use, because they don't like giants, because this ghoul and necrophile and eugenicist that was the one of the fathers of anthropology, and every theory he ever had was wrong. Okay, he was running around cutting off people's heads, said that there was no giants, just slightly more robust people. And of course, being an anthropologist, and not a zoologist, he doesn't know that, see, all members of the same species are relatively the same size. There's no such thing as exaggerated sizes in the same species. Doesn't happen, or very, very rarely happens, where you don't have 1,000 individuals that are all this size, or in some burial pit somewhere here in the United States or anywhere else in this world. Okay, that we'll talk about in a second. All right, so you got this cockamamie thing here that nobody can get into except a giant sized person. Okay, that's great. Seems to be more in the argument of coming across old ruins and then, claiming that, you are the creator of these things and whatnot because you're so fine and great and terrific. You know, like many of the past rulers in the past did, altered history to fit their definition of it, whatever it might be. So think about that. So you got this thing and how it relates to that molten thing and this molten thing and all that kind of stuff. Some sort of relationship there in the story there. But this is so long ago and retold story over hundreds or thousands of years. Of, you know, it all takes other meanings and context. Okay, so let's just read through this for a second from Wikipedia here about Solomon's Temple here and what it is, in Islam. The Quran refers to Solomon's temple in the seventh verse of Surah al Isra, the night journey. If you, the children of Israel, act rightly, it is for your own good, but if you do wrong, it is to your own loss. And when the second warning would come to pass, your enemies would be left to totally disgrace you and enter the temple of Jerusalem as they entered it the first time and utterly destroy whatever would fall into their hands. Quranic commentators such as Muhammad al-Tahir ibn Ashur have postulated that this verse refers specifically to the Temple of Solomon. Okay, why they put that in there, and then they have this. According to the narrative in Islam, the temple in Jerusalem was originally a mosque commissioned by Solomon and built by Jinn on the commandment of Allah, with the purpose of serving as the Qibla for the Israelites. Okay, so get this, something that I didn't know, and I don't think a lot of people know, except students of Islam maybe know. Okay, in the early years of Islam, Prophet Muhammad and his followers faced Jerusalem for prayers until the city of Mecca, specifically its Kaaba, superseded the former as the new Qibla. Okay, so isn't that interesting? I bet you never heard that before. And as far as the giant humanoids of the past, whether they be jinn or not or whatever, being involved in stonemasonry or whatever, and how important Solomon's temple it is, and as far as stonemasonry is concerned, check this out. Legacy: Freemasonry. Rituals in Freemasonry refer to King Solomon and the building of his temple. Masonic buildings where lodges and their members meet are sometimes called temples, an allegoric reference to King Solomon's temple. Oh, okay, so we have Freemasonry involved in King Solomon's temple that were built by giant jinn creatures, whatever they were. Okay, and of course, maybe this story has been retold so many times. Maybe it's just something a little bit more basic and down to earth, the original story about this, but this is what it comes down to us. Okay, that perhaps, these giant humanoid people who they're calling Jinn in this story, okay, were the ones who built this thing in the ancient past because they were masters of stonemasonry, right? Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, okay, so first of all, did they ever find any giant skeletal remains in the Levant there of any note or anything like that? Hmm. Well, I think they did, and just recently. Okay, so dig what this says here. While reports of giant skeletal remains in Levant, particularly the claim of the Nesher Ramla discovery, have circulated, they are often misinterpreted or lack definitive proof. Yeah, thanks to this jerk off right here. I got a warning for all you anthropologists and archaeologists. Stop following the work of Alice Herdlicker and applying it to your science. Okay? The guy was a fraud and wrong about everything he said. So if he said there's no such thing as giants, what that means is yes, there were such things as giants. You see, because this guy was insane. You see? Okay? Jack offs. They all have gigantism. It's so rare, but every skeleton dug up has every giant skeleton dug up has gigantism, except for the ones of the Belbeaker people and the Adena people, because their bones are so big. There's no way they could possibly have gigantism. They're more like Shaquille O'Neal or Andre the Giant or somebody like that. Okay, so in any case, all right, so these giant remains. So some reports have been shown to be hoaxes or misinterpretations of actual finds, while others focus on unusually large skeletons that might be the result of. Get this. This is their explanation for it, because first they have to say about hoaxes or misinterpretations, because that's the slightly more robust euphemism, which is all for people who they think are stupid. Okay, which means bigger. It's a euphemism for bigger. All right. Okay. So, any case, all right. So, this might be that might be the result of natural variations or even animal bones being mistaken for human. Okay, so first natural variations and then animal bones. Okay, so you don't know the difference between, no expert in anatomy and skeletal anatomy knows the difference between human bones and animal bones. Okay, I mean, they have this find, it's a recent one, by the way, 2023. Here in Smithsonian Magazine, more than 50 skeletons have been uncovered in a unique burial site. And what's unique about it is that these fossilized bones from a sinkhole in Israel may belong to a previously unknown group of extinct humans, potentially from the Levant over 100,000 years ago. That's very interesting. This says it does not definitively confirm the existence of a giant human race. It's more likely that these bones belong to a distinct, possibly larger group of early humans, but further analysis is needed, or further burial is needed to bury the whole story because of this jack off right here, the father of anthropology, the father of nothing. Okay? This guy was wrong about every theory he ever had. You can't have 30,000-year-old organized societies in South America and having them cross on that Bering Land Bridge 11,000 years ago. See how that don't work out? Okay, the oldest one should be up in Alaska and Canada, not in South America. All right? So, and, the eugenicists cutting off people's heads, thinking everybody else in the world other than Europeans are all subhuman and all kind of stuff. Yeah, follow this guy's work. He's really going to have an honest assessment of native people's abilities and all kind of stuff. Give me a fucking break. All right? They don't know what they're talking about, and they're still following this guy's lead. They're so stupid. They had to apologize for it, but they're not altering their thinking about anything. Now, are they? They want to stick to it a little bit because they don't want to completely look like fools, which is what they are. Fools. Okay? And this guy who took all the giant skeletal remains and they all went into a black hole somewhere that we can't find. Oh, we ain't got none. Yeah, but you confiscated all of these giant skeletal remains. Where the heck are they? Okay, so this just tells more about it. A new hominin group, the Nesherama Homo, with a unique blend of archaic and Neanderthal features, represent a distinct population not previously recognized. Let me tell you what they are. They're called hybrids there, you jerks, between the giants and normal-sized people. All right? This is from 100,000 years ago, so look, these hybrid people's been wandering around everywhere. That's just the ones we know about. Every square inch of this planet has not been dug up. All right, they found a few already. Well, if you found a few already, well, that probably means there's more, doesn't it? Doesn't it suggest that there's more? First, there was none. Then there's Neanderthal, Denisovin, this little Indonesian guy. And by simple analysis and observation, you can see all the different sized people all around the world. Well, you can't have that in all the same species. Don't you understand that? Any zoologist is going to tell you about every single animal on this planet. Except humans for some reason that they can't explain and don't want to. Okay? Because it is jerk off. You see? All right. So, anyway, back to this thing with the giant. Okay, so I wanted to know, is there any giant jinn that we know about at all? Well, sure there is. In Arabic folklore and mythology, marids are powerful elemental beings, often associated with the underworld and the depths of the ocean, which I find very interesting. They are depicted as rebellious spirits, known for their fierce temperaments and resistance to authority. In some traditions, they are seen as giants, the most powerful among the jinn, and often associated with the concept of genies. They are seen as giants. Okay? And who better to help you move big, giant stones that weigh hundreds and hundreds of tons, but rather large sized people? See, it's going to be a bit easier for them than it is for us because they're big. See? All right? So, easy to understand there, right? So, Okay, the Merid. They were known for their rebellious nature and resistance against authority, often depicted as being of the netherworld. It's just interesting to me because as I'm reading this and researching this and stuff, I'm thinking about who is around in that area. That's why I read the story about these bones found in the Levant there just recently. This cache of bones that they have there. Sounds like it might be a giant genocide, like we know happened in the past, right? With Joshua, right? In that area, killing all the giants right there that lived in the hills there in Hebron, Debir, and Anab, and all in the hill country of Canaan and all kind of stuff. Okay, so anyway, we'll get back to that in a little while. All right, so they are considered powerful beings, sometimes linked to the element plane of water, and are capable of manipulating water in various ways. Oh, I just find that so interesting, and how that might apply to anybody we might know about from that were around that area in the past, in the ancient past, associated with the ocean. Marids are often connected to the depths of the ocean, and some depictions suggest that they are solitary beings living near the coast. That's interesting. Water, coast. Grants wishes. In some narrative, marriage are described as granting wishes, but their nature is also known for being cunning, with warnings that only the clever and wise can safely interact with them. On not only they are all magical beings and shapeshifters and all kind of stuff like that, but you better be a smart cookie around them, see, because they're super smart. Okay. So again, I'm following along with the sound of the giants and building stone walls and working with giant stone and cutting stone, more stone masonry involved, and uh, they're clever and wise. So super intelligent, engineering skills, all those kind of stuff like that. Okay, so we're hearing about some of these giants in these narratives here. They can take on human form, though some depictions describe them with hooves or other aquatic features like fins or gills. Okay, hooves or fins or gills. It's all over the map there. Okay. They're often depicted as solitary, not living in communities with other jinn. Okay, so these might be recalling solitary giants. All the stories about solitary giants, all the myths are about solitary giants mostly. Anyway, masters of weather. Mariners are believed to be masters of the weather, and sailors are cautioned to be careful not to anger them. So I'm wondering where this, you know, the real history of this creature here, or whatever it is. Water spouts. Some accounts describe them as traveling across the water as a water spout, so they're giant, like a water spout. Giant Jim. The term married itself is often used to describe giants, reflecting their large size and power. So, one definition describes it as rebellious or rebellion, and then, like the second one is these giants used to describe giants in Arabic language. Okay, reflecting the large size and power. Okay, large size and power. Perfect for moving huge stones. Okay, who's gonna do it better? Me at 5'8", or some guy who's 8 or 9 or 10 feet tall? Okay, and some of his buddies. Okay, and maybe some rope or sled or whatever it was. But whereas we can't see ourselves building all this stuff. And look, the story of King Solomon and the jinn building the temple is obviously the the Muslims looked at the temple there and said, "There's no way that King Solomon with just some average Israelites are going to build this thing." He had to get help from somebody, and who's going to be helping him? Well, the giant jinn going to help him. Okay, describe giants. Merid itself is often so the Merid jinn, which are the biggest and most powerful ones. Okay, so where else can we hear tales about the jinn and they are giant and who they were and all kind of stuff. I just found interesting this story, this Arabic story of soccer. Okay, not like the game, football game, soccer. Okay, but this soccer guy. Okay, so let's see, soccer, rock, or the stony one. Wow, isn't that interesting? That this guy, soccer guy's name is means rock or the stony one. Isn't that interesting? Okay, also known as Mashmadi and Asmodeus in Greek and all these other names. Okay, was a giant genie and master of the sea. I find that very interesting that he's master of the sea. He was the Ifrit who is said to have obtained possession of Prophet Sulayman's ring from a woman named Jarada, also known as Kuna or Al Amina, the daughter of King Sidon, and to have impersonated the king for 40 days when Sakhr flew away and threw the ring into the sea where it was swallowed by a fish, which was afterwards caught and brought to the prophet Sulayman, who by this means recovered his kingdom. Suleiman sent for the shaitan, and he was brought. Suleiman gave orders to place him in a chest of iron, and it was shut and locked with a lock. He sealed it with his signet ring. Then he gave orders to cast it into the sea or imprisoned on Mount Damavan. The chest containing Sakhr was thrown into the lake of Tiberias. The shaitan will be in it until the hour arrives. His real name was Hankik or Habakik. So he's also known as Kitavras according to Slavic legends. Okay, so isn't that interesting that this guy Sakhr was the rock or the stony one? Just no idea. Just read about it here, and that's what this giant genie, this giant Jinn, was called. The rock or the stony one. Isn't that interesting? And the Jinn built the temple, and this guy had Solomon's ring or Suleiman's ring. That's all interesting in this story here. Okay, so I'm thinking to myself, okay, so again, let's go back to thinking about who was in these areas here in the far ancient past. Okay, so the Phoenicians were. Okay, here's the Phoenician alphabet. Okay, where did the Phoenicians live? Okay, primarily lived along the coastal strip of the Levant in the eastern Mediterranean, primarily in what is now modern Lebanon and the Syrian coast. Their major cities include Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, and Arwad. They were known for their maritime trade and colonization, establishing colonies across the Mediterranean, including in Cyprus, Sardinia, the Balearic Islands, Sicily, Malta, the coast of North Africa, and the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so we're hearing about these Jinn, the masters of water. They live by the coast. They were solitary, you know, creatures living by the coast and all kind of stuff. Okay, so and that's who happened to live there in the ancient past. And here again is the Phoenician alphabet. Okay, Phoenician alphabet here, and Wikipedia here. All right. Okay, and here are the letters in the Phoenician alphabet. This one looks like an A, right? Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, okay? All this stuff. Okay, so, and here's the Paleo Hebrew. Right, about to go right. Here's the Paleo Hebrew alphabet. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet. Okay, so it's the same exact alphabet. There's no difference between the Paleo Hebrew alphabet and the Phoenician alphabet. Okay, so again, it's my contention that the we know so little about the past, but what we know about the giants, okay, and up to modern times with the Watusi, the kings of the Fiji Islands, okay, the people from the Brighton Winter Cave, they discovered they have more bones, giant bones mixed with average people size bones. Okay, this dynamic was going on in the ancient past. So this whole story about King Solomon's temple and who was built by the giants, whether it was built by the giants or he contracted the giants, this is what my contention is. Okay, it's just so interesting to me, these stories. Okay, and all the things that I mentioned in this video here. Just think about all these things. I'm running out of power here at the end of this video here, but I basically said everything that I needed to say about this, okay? All right. So think about everything, all right? Joshua killed the giants in the hills over there. The giants were living in the hills over there, okay? So giants are living in the hills. Solomon, some of them were built by giant Jinn. Okay, who are these Jinn of the past? Maybe they were these giant people who were extremely intelligent. King Solomon is, the story about it is a little mixed up. Maybe it could be they came upon ancient ruins and found all this stuff. It seems that way from the giant, you know, uh, bowl that they found there for bathing in. That's not fit for average sized people to bathe in. Couldn't get out of the thing once you got in it. It'd be difficult to it because you couldn't get down, right? You get hurt. But in any case, that could be the whole story. But here's a story from Islamic tradition here, telling something that goes along the lines that the giants built the temple in Jerusalem, and they were giants in, but they're still giants. Okay, so this is what I allude to in a lot of my research, that who built all these things, including the pyramids in Egypt and all that kind of stuff. Well, the giant peoples, it'd be far easier for these giant peoples to build these things, whether they're contracted to do it, doing it for themselves. Okay, yeah, such thing as being contracted to do work. I'll build it for your specifications if you want me to. I'm not going to build it for me, but if it looks like it was built for me, then it probably was. Okay, so with giant swimming pool sized balls to go in for huge people. All right, guys.